The sky burned red above the dead planet. A small silver spaceship hovered low, its engines humming softly. Inside, soldiers in black armor dragged a young alien girl toward the exit. She was weak, wounded, and afraid. Her skin was pale blue, glowing faintly in the dark, and her large violet eyes filled with fear. She cried out, but they said nothing. They pushed her out of the ship and closed the door. Without a word, the ship flew upward, leaving a cloud of dust behind. The girl fell to her knees, coughing, watching the sky as the ship vanished. They had left her to die. All around her, the planet was silent, but it was not empty. Dark mountains rose like claws in the distance, and thick forests of black trees spread far and wide. Strange growls echoed from the shadows. And the ground trembled slightly. She stood up slowly, holding her side where a burn mark still smoked. She had no food, no water, and no way to call for help. All she had was fear and a deep question in her heart. Why did they leave her? A rustling sound came from behind the rocks. The girl froze, her breath shallow. From the shadows, a tall, twisted beast stepped out. It had 6 legs, sharp teeth, and glowing green eyes. It sniffed the air and looked straight at her. She turned and ran, stumbling over stones, her legs shaking. The monster chased her. Fast and silent like a hunter, she ran into the trees, branches cutting her arms. The growl of the beast behind her. Suddenly, the ground gave way, and she fell down a slope into a pit. The beast stopped at the edge, sniffed again, then turned away, disappearing into the forest. The girl lay in the pit, breathing hard, mud on her face and tears in her eyes. Above her, the red clouds moved slowly. Like blood in the sky, far away, something else entered the planet's atmosphere. A human ship, old and damaged, flew low over the mountains inside. A human soldier named Daniel sat at the controls, scanning the surface. His face was tired, his eyes sharp, and a long scar ran across his cheek. He wasn't here on a mission. He was lost. An energy pulse had hit his ship near a wormhole, and now he was crashing fast. "Warning, system failure," the ship's voice said. Daniel gritted his teeth as the ship shook violently. He grabbed the controls, trying to steer, but it was too late. The ship slammed into the side of a hill and skidded across the rocky ground, sparks flying inside the forest. The alien girl heard the sound of the crash. She looked up slowly, hope flickering in her eyes. Maybe someone else was here. She climbed out of the pit with effort, her body aching. Back at the crash site, Daniel crawled out of the wreck. Coughing from the smoke, he looked around, blaster in hand, every muscle tense. The air felt heavy and strange. Sounds echoed around him. He checked his scanner, but there was no signal. Alone, on an unknown planet. He had to find shelter before nightfall. Unknown to him, the girl was watching from a distance, hiding behind thick leaves. She didn't know what a human was, but he looked different from the ones who abandoned her. He moved carefully, checking his surroundings like a soldier. She saw kindness in his eyes when he looked at a small dead creature and moved it aside, not stepping on it. Could she trust him? Suddenly, loud roars broke the air. Monsters were waking up as the red sky darkened. Daniel raised his weapon and moved toward higher ground. The girl followed from a distance, her steps quiet but curious, as night came. The planet changed. Red lightning flashed in the clouds and shadows grew longer. The monsters came out to hunt. One of them sniffed the ground where the girl had walked. Growling deeply, it followed her trail, slowly moving closer. She didn't see it until it was too late. A huge shadow jumped toward her from the trees, claws ready to strike. She screamed, falling backward. Suddenly, a laser blast hit the creatures. Side it roared in pain and turned around. Daniel stood behind it, gun raised. Eyes locked on the beast. Another blast. and the monster fell, twitching, then silent. The girl looked up at him, shaking, unsure whether to run or stay. Daniel lowered his weapon and held out his hand. "I'm not your enemy," he said softly. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the voice, kind, calm, and human for the first time in days. She felt a small flicker of hope. She reached out slowly and took his hand in the distance. More growls echoed in the night. Their journey had just begun. She should have died. Everything said she would. Left alone, wounded, hunted, on a planet where nothing forgives. She was never meant to survive, yet here she was, sitting beside a human near the warm glow of a small fire. Her eyes watched him with quiet wonder as he fixed a piece of metal from his broken ship. Daniel, the human, didn't speak much, but his actions were loud. He had saved her life when he didn't need to. He had shared water, covered her with a piece of cloth, and stayed awake while she slept. The girl, whose name he didn't know, had stopped flinching at every movement. Still, she didn't speak. Daniel knew she was intelligent, but her language was nothing he'd heard. They sat together in silence, surrounded by sounds of growling creatures and cracking branches far away. Daniel checked his small scanner again, the screen blinking red. "No signal," he muttered. "No help coming." She tilted her head as if trying to understand. Daniel pointed to the stars, then at himself, then made a crash motion with his hands. She watched, then nodded slowly. She pointed to her heart, then to the ground, then crossed her arms tightly. Daniel understood. "You were left here," he said quietly, "just like me." She looked down, her expression dark. He could see pain in her eyes, and something more. Shame. Who would abandon her here? Daniel opened his small survival bag and handed her a nutrient bar. She sniffed it, poked it with one finger, then took a small bite. Her face lit up as the flavor hit her tongue. Daniel smiled a little. The first time in days, a soft rumble came from the trees nearby, and they both went still. The planet was never silent, and every sound could mean danger. Daniel raised his weapon slowly and stood up. The girl followed, crouching beside him. Her eyes scanning the darkness, a shadow moved. Between the trees, tall, long limbs, glowing eyes. Daniel aimed, but the girl touched his arm. She shook her head, then pointed to another direction, a safer path. They moved together through the forest, deeper into the unknown. Everywhere they stepped, the ground seemed to breathe. The trees whispered in a strange voice. Not wind, but something alive. Daniel noticed symbols carved into the rocks they passed, glowing slightly, written in a language he didn't know. The girl paused at one of them. Running her hand over the surface, her eyes glowed faintly, and the symbol lit up brighter. Daniel stepped back, surprised. Was she connected to this place? She looked at him and spoke her first word. She said softly, pointing to herself. Daniel repeated. Ishari. She nodded, her face calm. That was her name. The planet rumbled again, but this time it felt different, deeper, like something ancient had woken beneath them. A red light blinked in the clouds, and the temperature dropped fast. Ishari looked at the sky with fear in her eyes, then at Daniel. She said something in her language, fast and sharp, pointing to a cave in the hillside. Daniel didn't understand the words, but the fear in her voice was enough. They ran toward the cave as the red light grew stronger. Behind them, howls and shrieks filled the air. Dark shapes ran between the trees, hunting something. Maybe them, maybe something worse, inside the cave. It was cold and quiet. The walls smooth and glowing faintly with more of those strange symbols. Ishari pressed her hand to one, and a soft blue light lit up the space. Daniel looked around, then at her. You've been here before, haven't you? He whispered. She didn't answer, but her face showed guilt and memory in that quiet cave. Daniel realized something. She wasn't just left here. She was meant to be here, and he had just stepped into something much bigger than a crash and survival. He was part of a story he didn't understand yet. Outside, the red storm raged like fire in the sky. And beneath their feet, something ancient moved in the dark. The cave did not feel like a hiding place. It felt like a memory. Ishari walked ahead of Daniel, her hand gently touching the glowing symbols on the walls. The light followed her touch, like it remembered her. Daniel watched her closely, his weapon lowered, his guard still up. There was something about this girl, no, this alien, that didn't make sense. She had been abandoned, hunted, and almost killed. Yet she walked here like someone who belonged, like someone the planet knew, at the far end of the cave. They found an old stone altar covered in dust and small vines. Ishari stopped, staring at it with wide eyes. A low hum filled the air. Coming from the altar itself, Daniel stepped forward. But Ishari raised a hand to stop him. She knelt beside it, whispering in her language, the same word again and again. Koresh. Koresh, the altar responded with a pulse of soft blue light. Daniel's skin prickled, and the scanner on his wrist blinked with static. He didn't understand the meaning, but he understood one thing clearly. This girl was not just a victim. She was part of something ancient, maybe something dangerous. Suddenly, the ground shook again, not from the storm, but from something moving above the cave. The monsters were searching, hunting, sniffing through the trees. Their deep growls echoed through the rocks. Daniel checked his weapon and looked at Ishari. "We need to move," he said. Even if she didn't understand, she looked at him, then at the altar, and nodded before leaving. She tore a piece of cloth from her robe and wrapped it around the stone, whispering something as if saying goodbye. Outside, the red storm had ended, but the sky was still dark and heavy. They traveled through a valley of cracked earth and bone-like trees. Daniel led the way, but it was Ishari who kept him alive. She stopped him from stepping into nests, warned him with signs when creatures passed near. She used sounds, clicks, and hums to scare off flying predators. Daniel began to realize something strange. She was not just surviving this world, she understood it. She listened to the ground before walking, felt the wind before danger. It was like she could sense the planet breathing. As they walked, they came to the edge of a black cliff. Below them was a wide open field, glowing softly with blue mist. In the center stood a tall structure, like a tower made of crystal and metal. Half buried in the ground, Ishari stared at it, frozen. Daniel looked through his broken visor, scanning it. "Unknown technology," he whispered. "Ancient? Maybe pre-collapse." The moment felt strange, like time had stopped. Suddenly, something growled behind them. 3 creatures stepped out of the trees, their eyes glowing red, teeth long and sharp. They had found them. Daniel raised his weapon, firing quick shots. One of the beasts fell. Ishari grabbed a stone and threw it with deadly aim, hitting another. In the eye, the third charged, roaring, its claws ready. Daniel ran forward, grabbing its neck and pushing it toward the cliff's edge. The creature snapped at his shoulder, cutting through his armor with one final push. Daniel kicked it off the edge. It fell into the mist, its scream fading into silence. Daniel fell too. His knees, blood on his arm, breathing hard. Ishari ran to him, pulling him back from the cliff. She tore a piece of cloth from her sleeve and wrapped it around his wound. Her hands were shaking, but her face stayed calm. Daniel looked up at her, his vision blurring slightly. "Why are you helping me?" he asked softly. Ishari paused, then touched her chest and said, "You saved me." Daniel nodded slowly. 2 strangers. No common language, no trust at first. But now something was building, something stronger than fear. They were no longer just survivors. They were allies, and far below them, inside the glowing tower, something ancient opened its eyes. Asterisk, it began with silence. Not the normal silence of an empty place, but the sharp, tense kind. The kind that made even the wind hold its breath. Daniel sat in the shadow of a stone wall, his arm still bleeding through Ashori's careful bandage. They had escaped the monsters for now, but something worse was coming. The air felt thick. Like it was holding back a scream, Ishari stood at the edge of the cliff, locked on the sky, her skin glowing faintly blue. Now looked pale, afraid. She whispered a word Daniel had not heard before. Velinor. He stood and walked beside her, following her gaze. There above the mountains, the clouds had split open. Red light poured through like blood from a wound, and from that light something moved, not solid, not liquid, but alive. It twisted like a storm, but it felt like a mind. Daniel didn't understand what he was looking at, but his instincts screamed one thing. Run! Ishari grabbed his hand and pulled him back into the forest. Fast, and without a word, they ran between trees. Branches slashing at their skin, the ground shaking beneath their feet, behind them. The wind changed direction, not random, but chasing them. The red storm had found them. Daniel turned back just once, and what he saw burned itself into his memory. The forest was being eaten, not by fire, not by wind, but by something. Creatures were running too, not hunting now, fleeing. Even the monsters feared the storm. They reached a narrow canyon, the walls tall and black like burnt bones. Ishari led him through a tight path, barely wide enough for one. The storm screamed above them. Not a sound, but a feeling in their bones. Suddenly, Daniel stumbled, falling hard. He tried to get up, but his injured arm gave out. Ishari turned back, her face full of panic. The red light was already sliding into the canyon. She knelt beside him, placing her hands on his chest, whispering fast in her strange tongue. The symbols on her arms glowed bright, almost white, and around them, the red wind slowed, like it had hit a wall. Daniel could feel something pressing on his skull, like a hand trying to crush his thoughts. But then it stopped, gone in a blink. The storm pulled back like a wave and vanished over the mountains. Silence returned. Daniel opened his eyes, breathing hard. "What did you do?" he asked. Ishari didn't answer. She just looked at her hands, shaking slightly. She didn't know either. They moved forward again, slowly, carefully, deeper into the canyon. There, hidden between two rocks, they found an opening, metal, old, and half-buried. Daniel brushed off the dust and touched the surface. It reacted, unlocking with a soft hiss. A door opened, revealing a chamber filled with light and cold air. Inside were machines, walls of symbols, and the quiet hum of power. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a vault. And on the far wall, carved into stone, was a picture. Two figures, one human, one alien, standing beside each other. Below it, written in ancient script, was a warning. When the red mind rises, only unity survives. Daniel stepped back, staring at it. The storm wasn't just weather. It was alive, and it was searching. And somehow, Ishari had stopped it, not by force, but by something inside her, something the storm recognized. In that moment, Daniel realized something deeper than fear. This planet wasn't just deadly. It was ancient, intelligent, and it had plans. And he and Ishari were now part of them. Together, they sat in the vault, silent, surrounded by secrets. Outside, the storm circled back, watching, waiting. It wasn't finished yet. The vault had no windows, only walls that glowed with stories from a time no one remembered. Daniel sat beside a quiet machine, its lights blinking slowly, like it was asleep. Ishari stood near the ancient mural, her fingers tracing the faces carved into stone, human and alien. Side by side, the storm had passed. But the silence it left behind was heavy, too heavy. Daniel stared at his broken wrist scanner, then back at the strange device in front of him. He had seen old tech before, forgotten. Tech, but this was different. It was clean, untouched by time, almost like it had been waiting for him. He reached into his survival pack and pulled out a small signal chip. Damaged but still blinking. "If this thing can read it," he whispered. "Maybe I can call someone." Ashari looked at him, tilting her head. She didn't understand his words, but she understood the hope in his eyes. Daniel inserted the chip into the panel, and the machine woke up with a low hum. The lights on the walls flickered, the air shifted, and a soft voice filled the room. "Signal. Interface recognized. Transmission window, 30 seconds. He couldn't believe it. He stood up fast and began typing coordinates. Voice activating his distress call. "Survivor of crash, code 3, human origin. Planet unknown, requesting emergency extraction." The screen blinked. "Signal sent," the voice said. "Transmission complete." He let out a long breath, then looked at Ashari. "It's out there now," he said. "Someone will hear it." But Ashari didn't smile. Instead, her eyes filled with fear. She stepped back from the panel and whispered something over and over. "Varish, Varish." Daniel's smile faded. "What is Varish?" he asked before she could answer. The lights in the vault dimmed. Then the machine spoke again. "Signal received by unknown source." Daniel's heart skipped. "Repeat," he said. "Signal received by unknown source." Ashari backed toward the wall, her breathing quick. The vault shook softly, like something large had just taken a step above them. Daniel pulled out his blaster, staring at the door. They weren't alone anymore. Far above the canyon, hidden behind clouds, a ship floated silently. It had no lights, no signal ID, just sharp metal wings and black armor. Not human, not hers. It had been listening. And now, it was coming. Inside the vault, Ashari sat beside the wall, chanting softly. Daniel walked to her, his voice low. "Tell me what's going on." She looked up, and for the first time she spoke a full sentence in broken English. "Signal wake." "Old enemy?" Daniel froze. "What enemy?" She pointed to the mural again, this time at the shadows behind the figures, eyes in the dark, forgotten by time. "They hate both," she said. "Human Ashari." Daniel understood enough. The message didn't call for rescue. It called for war, and they had just lit the fire. The ground above rumbled again, dust falling from the ceiling. A loud metal shriek echoed outside the canyon, something massive landing. Daniel helped Ashari up, tightening the strap on his weapon. "No more running," he said. "We face it together." She nodded, her hands glowing with light she didn't fully control. They stepped outside the vault, wind whipping past them. Sky flickering red and black. A dark figure waited at the edge of the cliffs, armored head to toe, its face hidden behind glass. It said nothing, but even in silence, the message was clear. "We heard you, and now, we're here." Asterisk, she knew the sound. Even before the ship broke through the clouds. Even before Daniel reached for his weapon, Ashari already knew. The engine's cry was sharp, smooth. Familiar, the sound of betrayal. The ship above them was not part of the storm, not part of the monsters. It was her own. Her people had returned, but not to save her. Daniel stood with his weapon ready, eyes locked on the black ship as it slowly descended through the smoke. "Friends of yours?" he asked, but the answer was clear on her face. No smile, no relief, only silence and fear. The ship landed softly on a ridge, its wings folding like blades. A hiss of air, and the door opened. 3 figures stepped out, tall, armored, elegant in movement. They wore the same uniform as the ones who had left Ashari to die. The leader removed his helmet, revealing pale blue skin and sharp violet eyes. Just like hers, but colder, he spoke. In her native tongue, calm and precise. Ishari of House Velinar, your sentence was exile. You were not meant to live. She stood still, her fists clenched, her light pulsing under her skin. Daniel glanced at her, confused but alert. What's he saying? He says, I broke their law, she whispered. I am not allowed to breathe. The leader looked at Daniel now. A small smile crossed his face, and the human, he said in English. You must be the one who ruined our plan. Daniel raised his blaster. I ruin a lot of things, he said. The alien leader raised a hand and his soldiers pointed weapons at them. You sent out a signal, the leader said. That was unwise. Now others will come. You've turned this planet into a war zone. Daniel didn't blink. Maybe it already was. Suddenly, the ground between them split with a loud crack. Blue light exploded upward from the canyon, and the vault behind them shook violently from the glowing stone. Something rose, not a creature, not a machine, but something in between. The ancient power hidden in the planet had awakened. The sky turned dark again, and winds roared louder than thunder. The betrayers looked up, shaken for the first time. Daniel grabbed Ashori's hand and pulled her back. We need to move, but she didn't move. She turned to face the alien leader, her voice louder now, shaking with power. You feared what I could become, she said. Now you will see it. The markings on her arms lit up like fire, her eyes glowing bright white. The vault behind her pulsed in rhythm with her breath. The planet was listening, the storm was listening, and Ashari was no longer just a girl who survived. She was something more, something born from pain, betrayal, and light. The leader stepped back, his voice cracking. You don't understand what you're doing. I do now, she said, from above. Another ship arrived, but this one wasn't from her people. Its frame was sharp, dark, and unfamiliar. The unknown enemy Daniel's signal had reached was. Finally here, three sides now stood on the planet. One girl, once left to die. Now holding the key to everything, the betrayers aimed their weapons again. The storm howled louder, and the ground cracked open one last time. The war was no longer coming. It had begun. The planet was breaking, not with fire, not with chaos, but with awakening. Something ancient had opened its eyes, and it was looking straight at her. Ashari stood in the center of the storm, her feet on cracked ground, her hands glowing like twin suns. To one side, Daniel stood with his blaster drawn, guarding her back, bleeding but unshaken. To the other side, her betrayers aimed their weapons, shouting commands, but no longer in control. Above them all, the enemy ship hovered in silence. No banners, no words, only presence. For the first time, even the monsters of the forest stayed still, watching, waiting. The vault behind them pulsed like a heartbeat. Slow and heavy, Ishari could feel something calling to her from deep below the surface. A voice without sound, a truth without words. It wasn't just energy buried here, it was memory. She stepped forward, her body surrounded by wind and light. The storm didn't touch her, it moved around her. As if the planet itself was protecting her, Daniel called out to her, Ashari. She turned and looked at him, her voice calm. I remember now, she said, why they left me. They were afraid of what I carried, the alien leaders. Voice cracked through the air. You are not meant to carry it. He shouted, you are not worthy. She looked at him with steady eyes. I didn't ask to be, she said, but I survived. And now, I choose what happens next. The enemy ship above opened its lower hatch, revealing dark, twisted figures, not made of flesh or metal, but both. They dropped from the sky like black lightning, landing without sound, surrounding the field, One of them stepped forward, taller than the rest, with red glowing eyes and long claws. It looked at Ishari, then knelt. The alien leader gasped. "They recognize her," Daniel said softly. "She's not just part of the past, she is the key." The creature spoke in a deep, broken voice. "Blood of the source. Lost for 1,000 suns. You are the last." The betrayers opened fire, panic in their voices. But the creatures didn't fight back. They simply absorbed the shots. Walking through the blasts like shadows in a storm, Ishari raised her hands, and the air froze. Everything stopped: bullets, wind, sound, even thought. She closed her eyes, and the planet answered her. The vault behind them broke open, revealing a great sphere of pure light floating above the ground. This was the core, the reason her people had hidden. This planet, the reason they left her behind. Because only one with the true blood could touch it, and she just had, in that moment. The red storm dissolved into blue sky. The creatures bowed, fading into the earth. The betrayers dropped their weapons and fled into the forests. Daniel lowered his blaster, eyes wide, breath caught in his chest. Ishari turned back to him, her voice quiet now. "It's done," she said. He stepped forward, shaking his head in disbelief. "You were supposed to die," said, "and instead, you saved all of us." She looked at the sky, where the last clouds drifted away. "No," she whispered. "I just remembered who I am." And with that, the core dimmed, returning to its deep rest. The planet began to heal, the wind now soft, the monsters silent. Daniel and Ishari stood together at the edge of the new dawn. Two survivors who had changed a world, but far beyond the stars. Another light blinked, watching, calculating, waiting. The war had ended here, but the universe had heard her voice, and it would never forget it.